Technicians couldn't restart the downed helicopter. What the old man did next left everyone speechless. "Is this some kind of joke?" shouted the young technician, slamming his tablet in frustration. They'd been struggling for 3 hours, but the UH-60 Blackhawk remained lifeless on the tarmac. They kept laughing at the old man's ancient tool from his pocket, until the helicopter suddenly roared to life. The tension at Fort Campbell's main hangar had reached its breaking point. The 8-man technician crew had been working since 0600 hours, desperately trying to get the Black Hawk helicopter operational for a critical NATO exercise. This wasn't just a technical problem. America's international reputation was on the line. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the crew chief, wiped sweat from his brow. At only 28, he was facing the biggest failure of his career at its most critical moment. "Computer systems are showing all green," muttered the technician beside him. "But the engine won't respond at all." That's when an unexpected visitor entered the hangar. The old man approached with slow, deliberate steps. Around 65 to 70 years old, wearing a faded black jacket, pale blue shirt, and worn work boots. A small tool bag hung from his belt. Nobody paid him any attention until he spoke. "Excuse me, mind if I take a look?" he said in a calm voice. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up, irritated. "Sorry, but this area is restricted to authorized personnel only. Can you tell me who you are?" "Frank Mitchell, retired." "Retired what?" interrupted the young technician, Connor. "Janitor? Security guard?" The old man smiled. "Pilot." But the most shocking part was yet to come. The atmosphere in the hangar suddenly shifted. Connor and the other young technicians burst into laughter. "A pilot, huh?" Connor continued mockingly. "What did you fly? A crop duster?" Frank Mitchell's expression never changed. He just looked at the helicopter like he was seeing an old friend. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez wanted to intervene, but Connor kept going. "Look, old-timer, with all due respect, this machine is worth $20 million. It runs on cutting-edge computer systems. Nothing like the helicopters from your time." Frank Mitchell reached into his tool bag and pulled out an old stethoscope. Not medical, but mechanical. The metal piece was rusty. The plastic tubing cracked. "What's that supposed to be?" laughed another technician. "You gonna play doctor?" This is exactly when everything changed. Without saying a word, the old man approached the helicopter's main engine. He placed his ancient tool on specific points of the motor, closing his eyes as he listened. Whispers rose among the young crew. "Guys lost it. Someone get this old man out of here." But Frank Mitchell's facial expression was starting to change. There was something familiar in the sounds he was hearing. 1971, Vietnam War. Young Warrant Officer Frank Mitchell sat in the cockpit of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. The engine was damaged, under enemy fire. Wounded soldiers bleeding out in the helicopter's cabin. "Frank, the engine could die any second," his co-pilot had shouted. "It won't," he'd said calmly. "I'm listening to its voice. It trusts us." And that day, with a damaged engine, he'd carried 12 wounded soldiers to safety. Now, 50 years later, that same engine sound was ringing in his ears. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. "Fuel pump," Frank Mitchell murmured. "What?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped closer. "There's a blockage in the fuel pump. The electronic systems can't detect it because the pressure sensor is in the wrong location." The technicians looked at each other. The computer systems showed no fuel problems whatsoever. "Impossible," said Connor. "All parameters are normal." Frank Mitchell pulled out a small, handmade-looking tool from his bag. What is that? Asked Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Made it myself in '76. We had a lot of fuel system problems with the Hueys. Wait a minute. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez paused. Did you say Hueys? UH-1 Hueys? Yes. You flew in Vietnam? Frank Mitchell nodded. And the Korean DMZ. And the Iranian border. Flew for 32 years. The atmosphere in the hangar completely transformed. The young men's mocking attitudes gave way to respect. What you're seeing now is nothing. Frank Mitchell began using his homemade tool to access a hidden screw in the helicopter's fuel system. It was in a place modern technicians couldn't even imagine. What are you doing there? Asked Connor, now in a much more respectful tone. Sediment buildup in the fuel filter reduces pump efficiency. The computer can't measure this because it's an older design flaw. 5 minutes later, he extracted a small metal piece. It was a dirty, oily sediment chunk. Here it is, he said. This little piece stopped a $20 million machine. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked curiously, "How did you know that?" Had the same problem in '81, in Da Nang. Back then the computer said everything's normal too. Frank Mitchell cleaned his hands and stepped back. Try it now. The technicians approached the control panel, still skeptical. Connor pressed the startup button. The engine quietly hummed to life. The rotor blades began turning slowly. You won't believe this, but everyone in the hangar froze. The problem they couldn't solve for 3 hours had been fixed by the old man's 10-minute intervention. This is impossible, Connor stammered. As Frank Mitchell packed his tools, he said, "Computers know a lot of things, but they can't feel the machine. A machine is like a living thing. You need to talk to it." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached. "Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell, I apologize. Not recognizing you was a huge mistake." "No problem," said Frank Mitchell. "Young folks have learned to trust technology. That's good. But sometimes the old ways are still needed." Just as he was about to leave, Connor ran over. "Chief, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Did you really fly in Vietnam?" Frank Mitchell stopped, slowly turned around. First wave, March 1968. Tet Offensive. Silence fell over the hangar. "How many rescue operations did you fly?" asked another technician. "Never counted, but I remember every single one." This is when everyone realized the truth. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his phone and quickly called someone. "Colonel, are you in the hangar? We have an urgent situation." "No, not bad. Quite the opposite." 5 minutes later, Colonel James Patterson entered the hangar. The moment he saw Frank Mitchell, he stopped. "Frank Mitchell, is that you?" "Jim. How are you, son?" The two embraced. "Gentlemen," said Colonel Patterson, turning to the technicians, "this man was my father's wingman, and one of the most experienced helicopter pilots in U.S. Army history." "But Colonel," said Connor shamefully, "he only introduced himself as a retired pilot." Colonel Patterson smiled. Frank Mitchell flew 2,000 combat hours, completed 156 rescue operations, and... He paused, looking at Frank Mitchell. "You want to tell them? Or should I?" "You tell them, Jim." This man, in 1983, rescued 8 wounded soldiers under enemy fire with a damaged engine, flying the helicopter manually, earned the Distinguished Service Cross. The technicians were stunned. The old man standing before them was a living legend. Wait, don't miss this detail. "Chief Mitchell," asked Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, "that old tool, did you really make it yourself?" 1976 in Da Nang, on a lathe. Back then we couldn't get spare parts. You flew with whatever you could find. The tool now looked different in their eyes. This wasn't just an old piece of equipment. It was a life-saving invention. Colonel Patterson continued. Frank, would you teach these young men something? They really need it. Sure, said Frank Mitchell. But there's a lot to teach. Connor stepped forward. Chief, I'm sorry. I misjudged you. No problem, son. When I was your age, I thought I knew everything too. So, are there things you could teach us? Frank Mitchell looked around. There are. Many things. From that day forward, Frank Mitchell started coming to the hangar 3 days a week. Officially, he wasn't on any payroll. But everyone knew when there was a problem the computers couldn't solve, they called Frank. The young technicians learned something more valuable than any manual could teach: respect for experience, humility before complexity, and the understanding that sometimes the most advanced technology needs the wisdom of the past. Connor became Frank's most eager student. The same young man who had mocked the old-timer now hung on his every word, learning not just about helicopters, but about what it meant to serve. Chief, Connor asked one day, what's the most important thing you've learned? Frank Mitchell looked up from the engine he was examining. That every machine has a soul, son, and if you listen carefully, it will tell you exactly what it needs. The hangar grew quiet except for the gentle hum of perfectly tuned engines, a sound that, thanks to Frank Mitchell, would never be taken for granted again. Years later, Connor would tell his own students, technology is powerful, but wisdom is irreplaceable, and sometimes the two need each other to soar. 3 months after that first encounter, a small plaque appeared on the hangar wall. It read, "In honor of CWO Frank Mitchell, who taught us that the best technology is worthless without the wisdom to use it." Nobody knew who put it there, but everyone knew it belonged. The helicopter that had sat silent now flew missions around the world, and somewhere in its perfectly tuned engine was the echo of an old pilot's wisdom, proof that some things never become obsolete. Frank Mitchell still comes to the hangar, still carries his homemade tools, still listens to the voices of machines. And the young technicians? They listen too now, because they finally learned the most important lesson of all. Respect isn't earned by age, it's earned by service. And true masters never stop teaching.